Our second reading today is from the Gospel according to Mark chapter 8, verses 27 to 38. Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they answered him, "John the Baptist, and others Elijah, and still others one of the prophets." And he asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" Peter answered him, "You are the Messiah." And he sternly ordered them not to tell anyone about him. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all this quite openly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." He called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." And may God speak to us through these verses today. There's a Christian writer, Barbara Brown Taylor, who tells the story of a woman who stepped out of her church one Sunday after the worship service and ran into a stranger on the sidewalk. And this stranger, they started talking for a few minutes, and the stranger kind of pointed at the church and said, "Well, can you tell me, what is it you guys believe in there?" And this woman started to answer, but suddenly she realized she didn't have an answer, or at least she didn't know how to put it into any words. And as she stood there struggling and trying to figure it out, the stranger said, "Well, I'm sorry if I bothered you, never mind," and walked away. And that stranger did bother her. The incident bothered her for some time, and it led her to do some soul searching. She had belonged to that church her whole life. Why couldn't she answer that question? What do you believe in there? Now, maybe right about now, we're all asking ourselves, well, what would I do if I went out there and somebody asked me that? Someone who says, what goes on in there? Why do you come here week after week? What is it you believe? Now, I've been a minister for quite a few years now. Every week I get to stand up here in a pulpit, tell people what I think, what I believe. And sure, we ministers, we go for training and education, except how to use a microphone. There are plenty of theology books out there, thousands of them, hundreds of thousands of them. But listen, one reason there are so many theology books out there is because there are so many theologies. Not all theologians agree. They don't agree on the big stuff. They don't even agree on all the little stuff. And to be perfectly honest, there is no such thing as a single Christianity, if we mean by that one set of beliefs that everyone agrees on. There are actually many Christianities, and the only thing we all have in common is that we try to follow Jesus Christ. We don't all mean the same thing by that either. To me, that all suggests that theology is not the answer. Theology can be helpful, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes theology splits us apart rather than unites us. It can stir up hate and controversy rather than love and oneness. So in my opinion, theology cannot be what our faith is about on the deepest, most meaningful level, the level where Jesus wants us to experience faith. In our gospel reading, Jesus and the disciples traveled to Caesarea Philippi. It was kind of a resort area. They go off to be by themselves, maybe for some rest and relaxation. Maybe they're on a kind of spiritual retreat. But during their time there, Jesus asked them a question. Who do people say that I am? In other words, what do people think of me? What impressions do they have? What do they think I'm up to? So the disciples tell him what they have been hearing. Some think you're John the Baptist. You might remember John was killed by King Herod. And in one of the Gospels, Herod hears about Jesus and is afraid that John has risen up again somehow in Jesus. So apparently there are some others who believe that John is somehow living on through Jesus too. Some think you're Elijah. Elijah was considered Israel's greatest prophet, and there was a legend that Elijah would return when God was about to establish the kingdom on earth. So some believe that Jesus is Elijah here to usher in that kingdom. Still others think you're one of the prophets. Now, I've mentioned before that people in that time and place, they didn't really believe in what we would call reincarnation, not the way we think of it, but they did believe that the essence of someone, the spirit of who they were, could live on in others. I mean, we believe that too. You know, I've mentioned before this analogy, sort of like when someone says, you are your mother just all over. You're not really your mother, you're just a lot like her. Or we say that some new political figure is the new JFK or the new Ronald Reagan. So some people think that Jesus seems so much like Elijah or those other prophets that it was like they were still here with us. Then Jesus asked them, what about you? Who do you say I am? Now, I think Jesus already knew what other people were saying. He was causing a pretty big stir. Surely many people in those crowds had some idea, some opinions. They called him names of honor, titles of praise. But now he is with his closest friends. He is with his inner circle. And now he is asking them, never mind the rumors, the gossip, the guesses, the theories, the secondhand information. Never mind what other people are saying about me. Who am I to you? And maybe there's this long pause as these simple men think about it. They've been following this guy, Jesus, for a while. They've witnessed and experienced some pretty incredible things. Well, what does it all mean? What does it all add up to? Maybe some of them hesitate to answer. They're afraid of giving the wrong answer or saying something the rest of them will think is foolish. Then Peter steps up to the plate, as he usually does, and he says, you are the Messiah. You're the Christ. That's a bold statement. We translate Messiah as Christ, but both words mean the same thing. The one chosen by God to speak and act for God. The one that the ancient prophecy said would come to liberate the people and set this world right. And to call Jesus the Messiah, the Christ, meant that Jesus was so much like their idea of this, so much like their concept of God, that Jesus so fully embodied the Spirit of God, he was, for all intents and purposes, the same as having God right there with them. That's who Peter believes Jesus to be. So Peter is the first to confess that Jesus is the Messiah, the Christ, and Jesus does not argue with him. But he does do something strange. He would go on to tell his people, keep that to yourselves. Don't go blabbing it around. Why not? Well, one reason may be the fear that the Roman authorities would get wind of it and try to stop him. After all, the Messiah was supposed to shake things up. Rome didn't want that to happen. But another reason may be that people still had a few things to learn about what a Messiah really is. Jesus knew that the way of a Messiah was not the way of power and glory. Instead, it was the way of peace, humility, and love. It was the way of the cross. And that's a very different kind of power and glory. The cross That was how you shook up the world God's way. And even Peter would have to readjust some of his ideas about the Messiah. Only a few verses later, when Jesus says he's going to suffer and die, Peter pulls him aside and says, knock off that kind of talk, Jesus. It's probably bad for morale to hear that your Messiah is going to be killed. We can't let that happen, Jesus. But Jesus accuses Peter of getting in his way, of getting in God's way. Peter goes from being the foundation rock to being a stumbling stone. Peter is still clinging to beliefs and ideas that Jesus needs him to let go of. Eventually, Peter and the others would come to understand. But if they went blabbing too soon about Messiah before even they themselves understood what it meant, they would give people the wrong idea. They could create false hopes and false expectations. It's as if Jesus is saying, the time will come for speaking of Messiah, but until then, spend some more time with me. Keep learning from me. Now, years ago, there was a TV game show called To Tell the Truth. Anybody remember that show? 3 people would come on stage. They would all claim to be the same person. And this panel of people would ask them questions and try to guess which of them was the real person. Sometimes they would guess wrong, but really only because, they didn't really get to spend a whole lot of time with this person. Or they were asking the wrong questions. But sometimes people would guess right. But it's only because they did get to know that person better and ask the right questions. My friends, that is pretty much the only way we discover who Jesus really is to us, what we really believe about him. Only by spending time with Jesus, watching, listening, learning, can each of us truly say, this is who he is to me. There has never been a shortage of people out there who are eager and willing to tell us who Jesus is. And far too often people have said, believe what I believe about Jesus or else you're not really a Christian, or we'll kick you out of the church, or you're going to hell. In the old days, it might even kill you, maybe even today. Now, we can settle for easy answers and secondhand beliefs, but easy answers tend to fall apart when we face the really hard questions. And secondhand beliefs can only produce a secondhand faith. Besides, as one writer suggests, the fact that even those who were closest to Jesus, the ones who knew him best, the fact that they kept misunderstanding him, should remind us all how dangerous it is for anyone to claim to know too much about him. Who do you say I am? That question's cut straight to the heart. Jesus is not interested in popular opinion or stock answers. If your husband or wife asks you how they look, you wouldn't say, well, the neighbors think you look great. Well, let me go take a survey, a poll, and I'll get back to you on that. And you probably shouldn't just say, yeah, you look fine. Where's the TV remote? You wouldn't do those things because you're in a relationship with your spouse and it matters to them what you think about them. Jesus wants to forge a relationship with us, a close relationship in which he means something to us and we mean something to him. But that question, who am I to you? It asks us to really look at him, to look beneath what another writer calls the shellac that everyone has covered Jesus with for the past 2,000 years. That question invites us on a voyage of discovery, because discovering who Jesus really is a lifelong process. I do not understand or experience Jesus the same way now as I did when I was a child or a teenager or an adult or even last year, and I don't think I'm supposed to. I think my understanding of Jesus is supposed to change and grow so that our relationship can change and grow. And like those first disciples, sometimes there are things about Jesus we need to let go of, and other things we need to start taking hold of. But on this journey of learning who Jesus is, we also learn, my friends, who we are. You know, what we believe about Jesus determines our attitudes, our decisions, our words and deeds. What we believe about Jesus shapes our lives and our very souls. Discovering Jesus is also really discovering ourselves. Now, earlier I mentioned the woman and the stranger outside her church who asked what she believed in there. The woman was flustered for a response. And maybe what continued to bother that woman was a fear that if she didn't have an answer for that stranger, maybe she didn't even really have an answer for herself. This morning, Jesus is that stranger out there asking each of us who he is to us. Not who does the minister say he is. Not who do the pamphlets and the creeds and the theology books say he is. Not who does the world say he is. But you. Who do you say I am? Amen.